18 consecutive years in solitary confinement will break the human spirit. For Ian Manuel, it became the crucible for a life dedicated to reform. Sentenced to life without parole at just 13 years old, Ian spent 26 years in prison. I'm Jack Newton, and this is Matters. In this episode, we unpack Ian's harrowing journey through the Florida penal system and his ultimate path to freedom. Here's my conversation with Ian, author, poet, and advocate for criminal justice reform. Ian, thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to have you back in the Clio orbit. You last joined us and I chatted with you at ClioCon 2021, which was a virtual ClioCon in the midst of COVID. But today we're super excited to be joining you in your hometown. We're here in New York City where you live and work. For anyone listening that might not be familiar with your story, can you give us an overview of what's brought you here today?
When I was 13 years old, I committed a violent crime due to the fact that I was encouraged by some older teens to to participate in a robbery that occurred in downtown Tampa. Subsequently, a young mother of two was shot during this attempted robbery. A woman that I want to name by the name of Debbie Bakery. For that, I'm eternally sorry for what I did, and I've apologized to Debbie over the phone and the day of my release, because she met me outside of the jail where I was released. I was sentenced to life in prison for those crimes as a 13-year-old child, and ended up spending 18 years in solitary confinement due to the draconian nature of the Florida Department of Corrections. The crime happened in 1990. I was sentenced in 1991 after my lawyer convinced me to throw myself at the mercy of the court and plead an open plea of guilt. He told me that if I forced the judge to sit through a trial, that I would be sentenced to life, but however, that he had worked it out behind the scenes, that I would be sentenced to 15 years if I would just plead guilty. I don't know about you, but telling a 13-year-old child who hasn't even been alive 15 years yet that he would be sentenced to life in prison, 15 years in and of itself sounded like life because I hadn't been alive 15 years. So I told him no, I wasn't going to plead guilty. And he went to the audience and got my mother, sat down with her for about 5 minutes, and then brought my mother over to the side of the jury box where they kept the juveniles separated from the adults, and she told me, Ian, do what your lawyer say, plead guilty, do it for me. And I thought about all the times that my mother had told me to do something and I did the opposite, and I ended up reaping the consequences of my actions. And so I pled guilty, thinking my mother was leading me the right way. And she went to her grave regretting that decision because I wasn't given 15 years. I was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the crimes of attempted murder and robbery.
18 years in solitary confinement, is that an all-time record?
At the time, it was.
That was consecutive.
That was consecutive. So I was placed in solitary confinement November 1992, and I was released from solitary confinement November 2010. Sometimes just even remembering it makes my heart skip a beat. Like, Ian, you really stayed in a cell that long? Tough.
Many people conceive solitary confinement as something that is, maybe a 2 or 3 week stint that you get being punished for doing something extraordinarily bad. How do you end up serving 18 years consecutively in solitary confinement?
You're placed in solitary confinement and there's no time limit for it to end. The way the rule reads.
What did you get first thrown in solitary for?
Initially, I was placed in solitary confinement for excessive disciplinary reports. That was walking in the grass. That was missing a call out to medical. That was being yelled at by the guards and yelling back at them. That was getting in fights. That was being in unauthorized areas. I could go on. So a bunch of petty write-ups over many, many months. And they looked at it and say, oh, this prisoner is a management problem.
But again, this isn't checking somebody in the yard. This is,
No.
and again, you're a 13-year-old boy,
Mhm.
behavior that would probably be normal for any 13-year-old boy. These sound like pretty minor infractions, but
Yes.
cumulatively, they thought this is a problematic.
I distinctly remember being at one of my what's called CM, close management board reviews, to decide if I would be placed on another level of solitary confinement. And I remember telling the board, like, "Eh, what are you guys keeping me here for?" I said, had I did this in society, the things that you're trying to keep me in confinement for, my mom would have just kept me in the house for a few hours. And I remember the colonel over security interjecting and saying, "And that's exactly what we're doing. We're keeping you in the house to modify your behavior." No, you were keeping me in solitary for months and years until my behavior was modified in a way that you felt like you had broken me.
Right.
That's the goal of solitary confinement, to break the human will, to break the human spirit until you adopt a slave-like mentality of
Like, take the humanity out
yes,
of you. Yeah.
yes. Sometimes I just remember certain aspects of solitary and it comes back to me. It's just dehumanizing. No human being should be treated in that way. If I had a film for all the things I've seen and experienced in solitary confinement, it would shock the human conscience. And I think think people would be embarrassed and ashamed that they treated another human being or human beings in that way for such an extensive period of time.
Tell us about the exit from prison when you navigated this extraordinarily hard time, navigated the experience of being in solitary confinement for 18 years.
Bryan Stevenson came into my life. That's what kind of led to my eventual release. One day I was in solitary confinement and I get a letter from Alabama, and it has the EJI insignia on the front. And I'm like, I don't know anybody in Alabama who could be writing me. Little did I know that this letter was manna from heaven, literally. I opened the letter and it's basically, paraphrasing the letter, it basically said, "I'm the executive director of a nonprofit law firm in Montgomery, Alabama. For the last 20 years, we have primarily only handled death penalty cases. However, we recently began a project of assisting juveniles who have been sentenced to life without parole. And from afar, we look like we can offer you some legal help if you're interested." Right? Of course, I was interested, so he included a self-addressed stamp envelope as well as his phone number, and I contacted his office. He sent some lawyers down there, and they took my case, and they ended up appealing my case and another case through the Florida legal system. And it just so happened that another case, Sullivan, uh, the courts denied his faster than mine. That's how he ended up in the Supreme Court before me. Um, and long story short, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on May 17th, 2010, that it was unconstitutional to sentence a juvenile to life without the possibility of parole uh, for a non-homicide crime. I was subsequently taken back to court for resentencing. And once I got back to court, I thought I was going home. But the state of Florida had a surprise for everybody in the courtroom and said, "Your Honor, we are appealing this decision." Um, Everyone in the courtroom was shocked. Like, this came from the U.S. Supreme Court. The judge asked, like, "How are you appealing it?" And the state of Florida, and their vindictiveness, said the U.S. Supreme Court's uh, ruling was for juveniles who committed non-homicide crime. Mr. Manuel was charged with attempted homicide, which falls under the homicide statute. So we don't believe that this case applies to Mr. Manuel. We all knew that it was a bunch of bull, but the judge had given the state a right to appeal. So I went back to prison while the state appealed. They went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, who denied certiorari, thank God. And I was taken back to court in 2011, this time thinking I'm going home again. But the judge said something that let me know I wasn't going home when it came time for his deliberation in his chambers. He said there was a statement about rehabilitation and Mr. Manuel being rehabilitated. However, in 1990, when Manuel's crime happened, the legislative intent was to punish, not rehabilitate. I knew I wasn't going home when he made that statement. He went in his chambers to deliberate what I'm pretty sure he already knew he was going to do, and came back out, nullified and voided my life sentences, in place gave me 65 years in place of the life sentences. And this was happening all over the United States, where state judges was frustrated with federal judges telling them how to run their state. And so they were resentencing juveniles, trying to get as close to life as possible in a term of year sentence, not life without parole. So I was sentenced to 65.
And this is just incredible. He's going back to 1990 and saying the intent here was to punish,
Yes.
not to rehabilitate.
Yes.
And so I am going to punish you because that's what they were trying to do in 1990.
In 1990, right?
That is just incredible.
Yes, it's evil. So I went back to prison. 5 years later, my lawyers filed some more appeals, and I came back to court and was sentenced to time served in November 2016.
You mentioned Debbie came for your release. How did that come to be?
My legal team and Debbie was in communication with each other, and she actually had been in the courtroom the day of my final resentencing. So she wanted to be one of the first people to greet me upon my release, and she was. And I just remember getting to do something that I had only dreamed about. I never knew what side of Debbie was shot in the face, on the side of the cheek, and I never knew what side that I had shot her on. And I told myself if I ever got the chance, I would kiss her where I shot her at. And we hugged, and I kissed her on both sides of the cheek, and we just hugged and embraced in that parking lot before we went to downtown Tampa to get pizza. I came home and it was a culture shock. My lawyers like to remind me of the fact that when I first came home, I was terrified of crossing the street. I wasn't used to moving objects coming at me after so many years of being in solitary confinement in prison. Like, these moving objects scared the daylights out of me. I'm like, used to pull them back when we was crossing the street together, and it was like, we're fine. But reorientating myself into society was a struggle. It was difficult. From simple things like renting an apartment, to opening a bank account, to just.
Well, again, if you think about, you went into prison and came out in an era where the internet didn't exist.
Yeah.
When you entered prison, it did when you exited.
Yes.
Even something like smartphones
Yes.
weren't around. The amount of just technological change, never mind just all the day-to-day things like cars flying by.
Yeah, it was difficult to adjust to society, and what is not talked about enough is the amount of therapy a person needs to, when you've experienced deep trauma, to get back adjusted to society. I didn't even know I was traumatized by my experience, because it had become so normal to me to live in a traumatic state. But EJI,
Those are the majority of your life.
the majority of my life had been in a traumatic setting, so it had became normal. EJI, with their resources, limited resources, but with their resources, placed me in some intense trauma programs. There was one out in Phoenix, Arizona, psychological counseling services, where I went through intense therapy 12 hours a day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. There was things like equine therapy, psychodrama therapy, EMD therapy, family therapy. It was just so much therapy for 12 hours a day that it helped crack me and break through some of the things that I had been holding back and not knowing was there and existed. But I moved to New York. Some new ideas are coming to me as I think about working in the mayor's office. I'll give you a little bit of information on it. I recently posted a picture of my Florida inmate ID next to my 2 mayor's office ID, and I received so much online interaction of the contrast of someone being serving life in prison as a 13-year-old child to now working at the mayor's office in New York City, that people were like inspired. So I thought to myself, how much more would people be inspired if I got this out to more people? So I'm starting to write an op-ed about it. But getting back to your initial question about reintegrated into society, it's been difficult. I think one of the things that is missing from the reentry spectrum is and not to get ahead of your question, but financial literacy is something that is not taught in the African American community. And as I go through my programming in the mayor's office, I don't even there's a lot of financial literacy missing from the programming in the city. You have it in spots, but not consistency. And I found that once I was released, I had the book deal, I had Harvard buying my archive, I had grants, I had all type of speaking engagement money, and no one never stepped in and taught me how to manage my money. And I feel like as articulate and as intelligent as I am, I feel like I'm financially illiterate. And if someone like me with all I've been through and as intelligent as I'm supposed to be is financially illiterate, how about the people coming out beside me that doesn't have the opportunities that I might have,
Right.
you know? So I think that is something that is really missing from the reentry space. We as a community need to bond together to try to help each other as much as we can.
Tell me more about your journey immediately after getting out of prison. Obviously, a huge reintegration process, but how did you kind of find your feet and discover what was next for you?
It was a celebrity that was recently talking about how you just find yourself in the right rooms, right? The universe. I'm a big believer. One of my favorite books that I read in solitary confinement was called The Seat of the Soul by Gary Zukav. And the universe, I believe, will look out for you. And what I mean by that, I'm gonna give you a prime example. I was visiting New York, and I happened to be in this house for uh, uh, a fundraiser for John Ossoff, who was running for Congress at the time. And I mentioned to the host of the house, Miss Laley Linton, that I was moving to New York. And this lady, I didn't know her from a can of paint, and she didn't know me from a can of paint. But she said, Ian, how about you stay here till you get on your feet? And this lady stays on the Upper West Side of New York in a townhouse. I didn't like with 2 maids, live-in maids. And so that was a big transition to go from living in solitary confinement or surrounded by prisoners to living in the upper echelon and on the upper west side of Manhattan. It's just people helped me along the way. And that's what we need more of. Andy and Tom Bernstein gave me a job at Chelsea Piers Gym. Um, uh, like giving people opportunities who have offended at a young age, and not, but that's not the norm. The norm is, oh, you a convicted felon. We want to keep you far away from some society norms as possible. No, we don't want. We want to make it difficult for you to get a place to live. We want to make it difficult for you to rent because you have a convicted felon. And I experienced that to some degree.
Difficult to get a job. It's just
Difficulty getting a job, difficulty finding a place to stay. I'll never forget the first time I tried to rent a home in Alabama, an apartment. I wanted the house just because it was $329. I wanted the apartment because $329 is my birthday. And I remember the realtor saying, we can't rent to him. And one of my lawyers who worked for Bryan called him personally and was like, hey, I can vouch for him and he's not going to be a problem. And the guy was like, no, I have women and children who live in this apartment complex and we can't take that chance. But, God will put you where you're supposed to be. And I ended up finding an apartment with some landlords who became like family to me, Mr. Robert and Cindy Thornhill, who would do things like take me to the laundromat, take me grocery shopping, and readily rent it to me and gave me that opportunity that this other guy didn't want to give me.
so when you look at this reintegration process and just the way the response you saw from society. I remember a quote from Bryan Stevenson, who we had speak as a keynote speaker, I think back in 2019 at ClioCon as well. But I know a quote that resonated really strongly with the audience he was speaking to at ClioCon was, "Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." And it really feels like that's kind of the opposite view, which you are defined by the worst thing you've ever done, is, how you saw the justice system treat you, and then even once you've been released and you're trying to reintegrate, you're still being judged by that. If you had to reframe what that looked like for society and for the justice system, what would that look like?
I think I am the epitome of someone who is more than the worst thing they ever done. You got to realize for decades, starting with the lie that I was a super predator, that the judge and the state attorney saying that I was irredeemable at 13 to ever walk the streets of society again, that I was a menace to society. Um, I have proved through the 9 years I have been out of prison that all of that was false. That I am more than the worst thing I ever done. The worst thing I ever done was shot Debbie Bakery as a 13-year-old child. But I have made amends for that. I called Debbie Collect as a 14-year-old child, nearly a year later after the incident. I called her on the phone, Collect. She accepted my Collect call, and it was during Christmas of 1991. And this is before I went to confinement. And I spoke to her and I apologized for what I did as a kid, as a child, a year prior. And I didn't know what I was doing was what would be called restorative justice. I just knew I wasn't raised like that, and I wanted to make atonement and apologize for what I did as a child. My behavior post release shows that Brian's quote I is I'm the human form of that quote. I am more than the worst thing I ever done. Had I not had the U.S. Supreme Court, had Bryan not taken these cases to the U.S. Supreme Court to get us a second chance at life, my story would have been etched in stone that I was the worst that society had ever had to offer. And how can we as a society, uh, we should be ashamed of ourselves to put such a label on a child at such an early age. I am showing now that I am more than the worst thing I ever done by giving back to the community, by giving these talks to high schools and colleges around everywhere I go. When I share my story, the students and faculty ask, "When are you coming back?" Particularly the students, "When are you coming back?" They ask me this, and I haven't even left yet, right? But that shows that something deep within me is resonating and connecting with these audiences, and that those years that they kept me in solitary confinement, they were wrong. The years that the judge forced me to be in prison with a life sentence was wrong. But I wouldn't change a thing, because it really shaped me into the human being that I am today, and allowed me to rise like a phoenix from the ashes to be able to share my story. The test gave me a testimony.
Let's go back to that juvenile experience when you're being told as a 13-year-old that this crime has really defined you and made who you are as a person and your value to society, or maybe the lack of value you have to society, is something that's set, as you said, in stone. To the 13-year-old juvenile brain, what does that feel like? Take us back to that experience.
Um, if you're asking what did it feel like for the judge to condemn me to life without the possibility of parole as a child?
And again, you're trying to process that as a 13-year-old.
Yeah, so I didn't even know what life without parole meant. At the time, I thought I had 40 years. I thought the two life sentences running concurrent meant 20 years each. And I didn't understand all that legal jargon. Um, I just knew I wasn't going home with my mother, who was dying at the time of a deadly 4-letter disease that she contracted after my birth. And I knew that I wasn't gonna be able to spend my birthdays with her, that Christmas and Christmas toys was no longer was a thing of the past. That's what my mind was was trying to make sense of. Like, where's my mother? I was still a little boy longing for his mother's love. In prison, both you have to not show any signs of emotion, not weak emotions like tears or sadness, because both the prisoners or the guards will actually hone in on that and treat you worse. So learned to numb myself and block out the pain and push it down and just push through, no matter when they were gassing me with high-powered chemical agents that made my body feel like I was roasting alive, or just the physical abuse of being beat by guards. I would not yell or scream and let them know it hurt, till they got in their minds, oh, this guy's, he's crazy. Let's leave him alone. I didn't realize until I went through intense therapy that like the book says, the body keeps the score. And I had to process those emotions and cry in therapy, all the tears that I never cried in prison. I even wrote a poem that's in Bryan's best-selling book, Just Mercy, called Uncried Tears, about the cries that I suppressed and kept inside.
I know you live in Brooklyn and you work with youth locally and so on. Tell us about how you're trying to, maybe change the trajectory.
In the mayor's office my primary thing is I'm oversee community courts. And one of the locations I'm in charge of is Bronx Youth Impact, where the kids go and learn about restorative justice. I recommended that they take a trip down to Montgomery to see what EJI had built in the Legacy Museum, where I'm actually inside the Legacy Museum. You can go and pick up a phone and talk and hear some of my story and recite some of my poetry. Uh, I remember visiting Rikers Island, and I had a talk with youth out there, and they were like blown away that one of them had made it out and was on the other side. And I had, at the time, I had my inmate ID card from Florida, and I had my mayor's office ID, and I passed it around to the kids who were at Rikers Island jail, and they held it, side by side, and they looked, and I told them about my different speaking, and I told them how much money you could make from doing speaking engagements, and you could see the wheels churning and clicking, and they went to asking me questions about how did I get into public speaking, how did I get a book deal, and people will actually pay you to tell your story, and like, so I don't have to sell drugs, I don't have to rob somebody, and you could see like the interest building, because no one had actually given them these type of ideas before.
They didn't have someone to look up to,
They
as
didn't
a
have
role
someone to
model
look
as well.
up to.
Yeah.
Role model, right? So these are some of the things I've got to do since I've been out. I live two different lives. On one end, I'm living my day to day, just regular life, and then sometimes I get invited to things like Amazon Campfire, where I'm having Jeff Bezos tell me about my poetry, or Lucy Liu telling me she wants to like work with me on my poetry, like, and it feels good to go from being told over and over again, Ian, you are just an inmate. Ian, you are a number, 518907. That's your number. That's all you're gonna ever be. To having people who have achieved monstrous success in this world tell you that you are worth something. And so I just hope that my story continues to inspire people and show that we are more than the worst thing we ever done, and that, like my quote says, the impossible is obtainable.
I'd love to hear your comment, maybe in the, 30 years since you were first sentenced to your prison term, and today, again, it felt like you were misguided down a very unfortunate path through the advice that your initial lawyer gave you and your mother around, pleading guilty for that crime. Do you think in those intervening 30 years things have gotten better? Would a youth in a similar situation to yours be in a better position today, the same, or maybe even worse?
I think things have improved. Um, I think the lawyer, again, the lawyer that was in charge of my pretrial and plea, Bryan Gonzalez, um, I think he should own that. That's why I said his name during this podcast. He should own what he did to me as a child.
These are incentives, we were talking about earlier, the broken incentives. The lawyer got the guilty plea,
Right.
the judge got his guilty plea, they got somebody doing time.
Mhm.
Those were all kind of positive outcomes
Positive
for
outcome for
them.
them. Not for me. Something I didn't mention in this interview was the fact that the judge said during my sentencing, Mr. Manuel, there was a statement about giving you a second chance. However, sometimes there are no second chances. And so for the crime of attempted murder, I sentence you to life. For the crime of attempted robbery, I sentence you to 15 years. For the crime of attempted murder, so I sentence you to life probation. And the life probation is to run consecutive, and it is being imposed in case the Department of Corrections should, for whatever reason, ever release you. So he gave me life and then gave me life probation on top of it in case some type of way I magically got out. But the life probation has been nullified and voided. So
Right.
thank God for that. But getting back to your original question, the lawyer, Bryan Gonzalez, uh, he manipulated me. He played on the kid's emotions and intelligence. He used my own mother against me. Like, how much of a scumbag do you have to be to use a kid's mother to get them to do your dirty work for you? But to answer your question, I think we have progress by the Supreme Court's ruling in Graham versus the state of Florida, and Miller versus the state of Alabama, and Jackson versus the state of Arkansas. We have shown progress. But now I don't think today that those rulings would happen with the way the Supreme Court is set up today. I think those rulings would not come, and I would die in prison. And so we have to keep changing the narrative and showing, like Bryan says, that kids like me are more than the worst thing we've ever done. Evan Miller, for example, that changed the trajectory of juvenile life sentences for juveniles who had committed homicide, is still incarcerated in the state of Alabama. While many people have used his case to get out, he has not been given a second chance. And EJI is continuing to fight for his freedom. While we've made progress, there's still more progress that needs to be made, starting with the release of Evan Miller.
Why is Evan Miller still unreleased?
Because he is incarcerated in the state of Alabama. They reimposed the same life sentence that he was given. But the way the law reads for the juveniles who were sentenced to life without parole for homicide crimes, it's up to the judge to whether to reimpose the life sentences again when they come back up.
So even though his case is served for precedent to see others released, he was resentenced and is still in prison.
Still in prison, and that is sickening. He deserves a second chance at freedom. I can only, my heart goes out to his agony, the agony that he's in at seeing other people reap the benefits of his case while he still suffers in a Alabama prison. It's sad.
When you spoke at ClioCon in 2021, the audience was primarily lawyers and legal professionals, and those listening, to our discussion today are, again, mostly lawyers and legal professionals. If you had a call to action to those legal professionals to either advocate in a different way or to argue for policy changes in the system, maybe changes to law, what would you recommend? What do you think is most broken and in need of fixing?
How solitary confinement is implemented in the United States of America, and not only how it's implemented, how long you're kept there. The United Nations says over 15 consecutive days is considered torture in solitary confinement. Well, right now, I know individuals, because I'm in steady communication with people that are incarcerated on Securus, and I have a guy that's been in solitary confinement who's broken my record by the name of Dal Streeter. He's been there 26 years. He has severe mental health illnesses. He shouldn't be in solitary confinement anymore. He should be given intense mental health treatment and released from solitary confinement. He has a life sentence. He's been in solitary confinement 26 years. What? Did he kill somebody? No. Has he been, has his mental health eroded, and has he decompensated to the point that he's no longer like a regular human being? Sure. My answer to that would be,
But is that because he's been in solitary confinement for 26 years?
yes, over a quarter century. That would be one call to action. Another call to action,
Do you think there's any need for solitary confinement?
That's a great question, and I might get pushback from my advocates for this, but I do. But I would think they claim in Florida, for example, that solitary confinement is for the worst of the worst, but that's not what it's used for. You could be placed in solitary confinement for yelling, for having a mental health episode, right? I think solitary confinement should only be used for violent people who are trying to stab, hurt, kill, maim, and do violent acts, not for having too much canteen commissary, not for being typical teenage behavior as I was placed in solitary confinement. And the way that you're kept there, like you need 6 perfect months. If you do anything, I liken it to an out of control elevator with three floors. On the first, you have to stay on the first floor for 6 perfect months, and then you'll go up to the next level. 6 perfect months on the second floor, 6 perfect months on the third floor, and then the elevator opens and you step out in the open population. However, if you get a write-up for missing a shower, getting caught standing on the door while the female nurses walk on the wing, sometimes you're gassed with chemical agents for that. That's another 6 months. And sometimes you'll bump back down to the first floor and you find yourself in this out of control elevator, how I was for 18 years, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, until finally, you know, sanity came into play. And I wrote U.S. Senator Bill Nelson, who sent my letter to the Secretary of Department of Corrections, and they gave me a opportunity to get out of that cell. And another one would be the law that actually sent me to prison that's still on the books right now today. And it says in Florida, a child of any age that's indicted for a life or death felony shall be treated in every respect as if he were an adult. That means you can be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and sent to an adult prison for life. Maybe not life anymore, but tried as an adult based on this obscure Florida law that's still on the books. And I think it needs to change.
And is that underway? Are there efforts to do that, or they've just been unsuccessful?
I don't think there's any effort. I just spoke at a reentry event in Tallahassee, Florida, which is the state capital of Florida. And afterwards, one of the commissioners came up to me and said, "What you just said about that Florida law really resonated with me, and I would love to get behind it. We can't change the law, but we can lobby to have it changed. Here's my card, email me, and let's see if we can get something done about it." I emailed them and never heard back. So hopefully some lawyer will see this podcast and say, that would be something my law firm would like to get behind.
I hope somebody's listening. When you look at your experience in the system, another topic you've spoken on is the need for more transparency and more accountability to what happens to youth when they enter the system. Again, it felt like you entered the system at 13 and disappeared. How can the system provide some more transparency to help eliminate the risk that, or at least reduce the risk that children disappear in the system in the same way you did?
I don't think we can depend on the system to monitor itself. I think we need lawyers like people to take the example of Bryan Stevenson and make the states provide the data of these children who have been left behind. Like what Bryan did is not the norm. He reached out to me and found me. It's usually the other way around. You know, for years I had been clamoring for legal assistance as I fought the system by myself for so many years. You can't depend on the system to monitor itself. We need lawyers to make the Department of Corrections. Hey, can you provide me with the data of how many uh, people under the age of 18 is in the Department of Corrections and what their crime is for? And how many do you might have in solitary confinement? When I was still in solitary, I testified via uh, electronic testimony about a hearing in Congress about solitary confinement. And afterwards, President Obama signed a declaration that no juvenile should be kept in solitary confinement in federal prison. But there's very little juveniles in the federal system. I wish governors of all 50 states would do the same thing and take that initiative that President Obama so it can really have an impact. President Obama had the right idea after my testimony, but it needs to be carried further. And I think the governors of the states, and if lawyers could apply pressure to do that, it would be very grateful.
You've dealt with, I'm sure, a wide range of lawyers over
Yes.
your journey. Obviously have heroic lawyers like Bryan Stevenson that have supported you, but also your initial lawyer that gave you and your mom some catastrophically bad counsel.
Right.
What have you seen separate the best lawyers that you've worked with in your journey from some that have maybe set you on?
So that's a great question, and I love the way you put it. The difference between the two Bryans is, and this is the advice I would give, is that one led with selfish interest, self first. He was thinking, in my opinion, how bad it would look on him if he went to trial and lost his case with this judge that he felt like I was guilty and he was looking for an easy way out. And
He didn't go to jail. He didn't do his job.
He
Is
did.
how he felt.
Yeah.
Even though he's representing you.
Exactly. In another case, I remember a guy that was working at EJI, lawyer. He was going to work at a public defender, or he was leaving EJI to go work at a public defender office in Seattle. And he asked me, Ian, any advice for me? And I said, yes, lead with empathy. I said, you're going to have a lot of clients and you're going to have your supervisor trying, as a public defender, trying to help. They want you to get through these cases as fast as possible. As fast as possible, get them off the docket. I say, I want you to pretend or imagine that these clients of yours are your brother, your sister, your father, someone close to you. And how would you want to treat them in that instant? And I think if lawyers would lead with that type of empathy, actually, like what I want my son, if I pretending like this client was my son, would I treat my son like this? Would I just try to plead him out real quick? Or would I actually put my time and consideration into this? I know I have a boss to please, but I also have my own heart that I need to lead with empathy. So just asking lawyers to put themselves in their client's shoes and treat them like their family, because in many cases I've become a part of EJI's family. And I think that is the model. EJI treats their clients like family instead of just data.
Yeah, a transaction.
A transaction.
And this is somebody's life that you're
somebody's life. I agree.
You're impacting. When you look at the journey you've had, are you still angry over what happened to you?
No, I'm completely not angry. And I know I get that question frequently, like, "Why, Ian? You seem so joyful, whatever." I imagine what my life would look like had none of this ever happened. I wouldn't have reached my true potential. As bad as it was, being kept in that solitary confinement cell for as many years as I was, it allowed me to tap into a part of myself that many in society never get to know. I got to meet the real Ian. When you are faced with incredible circumstances and it's just only you and God alone, like, you really get to know And I didn't know I had the strength to make it through such excruciating circumstances until I had to face them. And again, it gave me a testimony to share with the world and hopefully inspire others that it's not too dark, that life is worth living. A lot of people committed suicide all around me in prison and didn't make it out. I didn't want to give up. I saw the superstar in myself, and I'm glad that the world finally gets to see it as well.
Well, that's incredible, Ian. I think that's a great note to end on. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Congratulations on the journey you've had and the impact you're now having on the world, and happy to support that in any way we can.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me, and I enjoyed this conversation with you and finding myself back in the Clio cloud orbit.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
One of my biggest takeaways from Ian today was his challenge to the legal profession to look past the transaction of a case and recognize the human life behind the data. If you were moved by Ian's story, we highly recommend his memoir, My Time Will Come. I'm Jack Newton, and thanks for listening to Matters.